I spent a full year working night shifts on an oil rig off the Gulf, the kind of job where the wind tastes like metal and sleep comes in 2-hour slices. Every break I got, I'd picture the one thing that kept me going, the quiet stretch of land I bought 12 years ago. 5 acres of dry earth and cottonwood trees. No HOA, no neighbors, no noise, just space to breathe. That place was the only promise I ever made to myself. But when I finally came back and stepped onto that soil, the first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the sharp smell of fresh asphalt cutting through the dry air. And then I saw them 3. Brand new mansions lined up like soldiers in a parade, with plastic lawns and a bright white HOA sign screwed straight into my soil. I'd been unreachable out there. No cell service for 366 days, which probably made them think I'd never come back. What they didn't know was that a year on an offshore rig strips you down to who you are. It burns away any fear of paperwork, authority, or people who swing clipboards like weapons. All that's left is patience and a memory sharp enough to recall every parcel number printed on your deed. So when I stepped out of my truck and saw Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, adjusting her clipboard and stepping forward like she was about to deliver a rehearsed speech, I didn't yell or argue. I just smiled back, because I knew something she didn't. All 3 mansions were sitting squarely on my land, and by the time I was done, they were paying me rent. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, let me tell you how this all went down. The drive from Galveston to the north side of Houston took 2 hours. I kept the windows down even though the air was thick and hot, wanting to feel the distance closing between me and the place I'd been holding on to in my head. My truck smelled like oil and salt water, and the laminated deed sat on the passenger seat, corners worn from being unfolded too many times. Section 14, Block 3, 5 acres, recorded at the Harris County Clerk's Office in 2012. Paid in full. No liens, no mortgages, no strings. Just mine. When I turned off the main road onto the county route, I started to see new street signs. Clean white posts with names like Magnolia Springs Drive and Cottonwood Lane. I slowed down. There were curbs now, fresh concrete that hadn't been there before. And then the houses came into view. 3 of them, massive and identical, sitting exactly where my land should have been empty. I pulled off to the side of the road and cut the engine. The cottonwood trees were still there, a thin limate along the eastern edge, but everything else had been transformed. Where dry grass used to crack underfoot, there was now thick sod laid in perfect squares, too green for this climate. A black iron fence ran along the perimeter, and near the entrance stood that white HOA sign. I got out of the truck. The air smelled like asphalt and fresh paint, chemicals baking under the sun. That's when I saw her. A woman in her early 50s, blonde hair pulled back tight, wearing a navy blazer in the heat. She was near the fence with a clipboard under one arm, and when she spotted me, she started walking over with the kind of stride that said she owned the ground beneath her. Her heels clicked on the pavement. She stopped about 10 feet away, positioned herself slightly between me and the gate, and said, "Can I help you?" The question wasn't a question. It was a warning. This is a private community. Are you lost? I didn't say anything right away. I just looked past her at the houses, at the green sod that didn't belong, then back at her. "I own this land," I said. Her smile tightened. "I'm sorry, but that's not possible. This is Magnolia Springs, an HOA-managed community. The properties here were developed through proper legal channels and sold to qualified buyers. If you think you own land in this area, you'll need to check your records with the county." She shifted the clipboard to her other arm, angling her body to subtly block my view of the gate. "Now, if you don't have business here, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I didn't argue. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small red piece of caliche, and turned it over in my hand. "I'll be back," I said. Then I walked to my truck and drove away. I checked into a motel 3 miles down the road. The room was small and smelled like bleach, but it had Wi-Fi. I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop and pulled up the Harris County Valley Appraisal District website first. I typed in my parcel number. The screen loaded. Owner Callum Reed, Acreage 5.0. No sale recorded. My chest loosened slightly. The county still recognized me. I opened the clerk's online portal next. My original deed appeared, filed and stamped, exactly as I remembered. But then I saw the second entry, a correction deed, filed August 15th, 2023, 2 weeks after I'd boarded that rig. I clicked it. The document opened. It showed a transfer of ownership from Callum Reed to Magnolia Development Holdings, LLC. My name, my property, but a signature I'd never written. I zoomed in. The capital R in Reed was too round, the loop in the C too tight. Whoever forged it had tried, but they'd missed the small things. I took a screenshot and kept moving. I searched the Texas Secretary of State database and found the LLC filing. Registered agent Karen Whitmore. Address a real estate office 2 miles from my land. I leaned back. The sequence was clear now. Forged deed. Shell company. Building permits. 3 houses sold. All while I was offshore with no way to know. I opened my wallet and laid my driver's license next to the screenshot of the forged signature. 2 versions of my name. One real, one fake. I picked up my phone and opened a new note. Surveyor independent boundary confirmation. Lawyer property dispute specialist. Title fraud experience. County clerk certified copies of all filings. I saved the list and set the phone down. No yelling. No threats. Just procedure. 1 step at a time. Until there was nowhere left for them to hide. The next morning, I was at the Harris County Clerk's office before it opened. I stood outside the building in the heat, watching the sun climb over the downtown skyline, turning the glass towers orange. At 8:55 a.m., the doors unlocked, and I walked straight to the records counter. The clerk working that morning was a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her name tag said Brenda. I told her I needed to pull the full chain of title for my parcel. Section 14, Block 3. She nodded, typed something into her computer, and asked me to wait. 10 minutes later, she came back with a thin folder and laid it on the counter between us. I opened it carefully. The first document was my original deed, the one I'd signed in 2012 when I bought the land cash from a retiring rancher. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the ink was still clear. My signature, the notary stamp, the legal description, all of it exactly as it should have been. I flipped to the next page. That's when I saw it. The correction deed, dated August 15th, 2023. It had the same legal description, the same parcel number, but the transfer line read differently. From Callum Reed to Magnolia Development Holdings, LLC. The notary stamp at the bottom was from someone named Susan Draper. Commission number clearly printed. Expiration date listed as June 2026. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the stamp, then looked up at Brenda. "Can I get a certified copy of both of these?" I asked. She nodded. "It'll take about 20 minutes. Anything else?" I hesitated, then said, "Is there a way to verify if a notary commission is still active?" She tilted her head slightly. "You can check the Secretary of State website. They keep a public database." I thanked her and stepped aside while she processed the copies. I sat down on a bench in the hallway and opened my phone. I searched for the Texas Notary database and typed in Susan Draper's name and commission number. The result came back quickly. Susan Marie Draper, commission issued March 2018, expired August 2022, status retired, not renewed. I stared at the screen. The stamp on the correction deed showed an expiration date 2 years after her actual commission had ended, which meant the stamp was fake. Someone had forged not just my signature, but an entire notary seal. I took a screenshot and added it to the folder on my phone. When Brenda called my name, I went back to the counter and picked up the certified copies, each one sealed in a plastic sleeve with a raised embossed stamp from the county. I paid the fee in cash, folded the copies into my jacket, and walked out into the heat. Back at the motel, I spread everything out on the small desk. Original deed on the left, forged correction deed on the right, side by side. The differences became sharper. My real signature had a slight backward slant, the way I'd always written since high school. The forged one tilted forward, like someone had been trying too hard to make it look confident. I opened my laptop and searched for property surveyors in the Houston area. I needed someone with no ties to the development, no reason to favor one side or the other. I found a name that came up in several county records: Roy Jenkins, independent land surveyor, 35 years of experience. His website was plain, just a phone number and a short bio. I called. He answered on the third ring, voice rough and direct. I told him I needed a boundary survey for 5 acres, that there were structures possibly encroaching on my property, and that I needed it done quickly. He asked for the parcel number, said he'd pull the plat, and told me he could be out there by Friday. 3 days. I said yes and gave him my contact information. Next, I searched for property lawyers. I filtered by specialty title disputes, real estate fraud, quiet title actions. One name stood out: Elena Voss, a solo practitioner with an office near the Galleria. Her website listing over a dozen successful cases involving deed fraud and adverse possession. I called her office. The receptionist put me through after a short hold. Elena's voice was calm and measured, the kind of tone that didn't waste time. I explained the situation in under 2 minutes: my land, the forged deed, the LLC, the houses. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do you have copies of both deeds?" I told her I did. "Bring them to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'll go through everything and figure out next steps." I agreed and hung up. I sat back and looked at the documents again. The pieces were starting to line up, but there were still gaps. I needed to know more about Magnolia Development Holdings. I went back to the Secretary of State website and pulled the full LLC filing. It had been created in July 2023, 1 month before the correction deed was filed. The filing showed Karen Whitmore as the registered agent, but there were 2 other names listed as managers: David Eng and Patricia Ruiz. I searched both names. David Eng came back as a general contractor with a business address in Katy. Patricia Ruiz showed up as a real estate attorney with an office in the Woodlands. I wrote both names down. If Karen had partners, they were either complicit or being used. Either way, I needed to know. That evening, I drove back out to the property. I didn't stop at the gate this time. I parked on the county road about 100 yards away and walked along the fence line. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the new pavement. I could see people inside the houses now, lights coming on in the windows, families settling in for the night. One of the houses had a man standing on the second-floor balcony, looking out over the neighborhood. He was in his 40s, wearing a t-shirt, holding a bottle of water. He saw me and frowned, then stepped back inside. I kept walking until I reached the eastern edge, where the cottonwood trees still stood. The fence ended there, and the ground was still untouched. Dirt and dry grass and rocks the color of rust. I crouched down and picked up another piece of caliche, smaller than the first, and squeezed it in my hand. This was still my land. The county record said so. My original deed said so, and no forged signature or fake notary stamp was going to change that. I stood up and looked back at the 3 houses, lit up against the darkening sky. They were solid, expensive, the kind of construction that didn't happen by accident. Someone had put serious money into this. Permits, inspections, utilities, all of it processed through official channels, which meant the fraud wasn't just on paper. It had been systematic, planned. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the houses from this angle, making sure the cottonwood trees were visible in the frame. Then I walked back to my truck. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Elena. Friday, Roy would survey the boundaries. And after that, we'd see how deep this went. Because if Karen thought she could erase me with a forged deed and a shell company, she didn't understand what a year offshore really does to someone. It teaches you that pressure doesn't break you. It clarifies you. And right now, everything was becoming very, very clear. Friday morning, I met Elena Voss at her office. It was in a mid-rise building near the Galleria, clean and professional, with a small waiting area and a receptionist who offered me coffee. Elena met me in a conference room 10 minutes later. She was in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a gray suit, and she had the kind of focus that made you feel like nothing else in the world mattered except the problem in front of her. I handed her the certified copies of both deeds, the screenshots of the notary records, and the photos from my initial visit to the property. She spread everything out on the table and started reading. She didn't speak for several minutes. When she finally looked up, she said, This is textbook deed fraud. The forged signature, the fake notary, the shell company, all of it. You have the foundation for a strong case, but we need more. We need a surveyor to confirm the boundaries, and we need to look at the building permits. Can you handle the permits office? I nodded. She pulled out a legal pad. Good. I'll start drafting a quiet title action. Get me that survey and those permits as soon as you can. I left her office and drove straight to the county permits office. It was a low gray building near the courthouse, the kind of place where the air conditioning barely worked and the fluorescent lights buzzed too loud. I told the clerk at the front desk I needed to see the building permits for 3 addresses on Magnolia Springs Drive. She asked for the street numbers, typed them into her system, and printed out 3 files. I took them to a corner table and started reading. Each permit application listed Magnolia Development Holdings as the applicant. The site plans showed the houses positioned on what the documents called Lot 7, 8, and 9 within a proposed subdivision plat. But when I cross-referenced the lot numbers with the legal description on my deed, the boundaries didn't match. The subdivision plat had been filed after the correction deed, which meant the lots only existed on paper if the transfer to the LLC was legitimate. And it wasn't. I kept reading. The permits had been issued in October 2023, 2 months after the forged deed. The inspection records showed signatures from county inspectors at various stages: foundation, framing, electrical, and final. Everything looked official, but buried in the 3rd file, I found something off. One of the required signatures was missing, the environmental site assessment, which should have been completed before the foundation was poured, had a blank line where the inspector's name should have been. The date was filled in, the box was checked, but no one had actually signed it. I took a photo of the page, then flipped back to the beginning of the file. The name on the permit application was Karen Whitmore, listed as the authorized representative of the LLC. I photographed every page, then returned the files to the clerk and left. That afternoon, I contacted Roy Jenkins. He was an independent land surveyor with 35 years of experience and a reputation for precision. I explained what I needed: a boundary survey for 5 acres with structures possibly encroaching on my property. He said he could be out there Monday morning. I gave him the parcel number and my contact information, then spent the rest of the day organizing everything I'd gathered. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet. Column 1, timeline of events. Column 2, document names. Column 3, discrepancies found. Column 4, relevant statutes. I worked through the evening, cross-referencing Texas Property Code section 13.001 on chain of title, Texas Penal Code section 32.21 on forgery, and Texas Penal Code section 32.51 on fraudulent use of identifying information. By the time I finished, I had a grid that laid out the entire fraud in a way anyone could follow, step by step, document by document, law by law. Saturday, I sent the permit photos and the spreadsheet to Elena. She replied within 2 hours. This is good. The missing signature weakens the permits, and your documentation is solid. Once we have the survey, we'll have everything we need to file. I spent the rest of the weekend going over the timeline again, making sure there were no gaps, no assumptions. Everything had to be airtight. On Monday morning, I met Roy at the property. He pulled up in a white Ford with a magnetic sign on the door that read, Jenkins Land Surveying. And when he stepped out, I could tell he was the kind of man who didn't waste energy on small talk. He was in his early 60s, weathered face, work boots caked with dried mud, and he carried a metal case in one hand and a tripod in the other. He shook my hand once, firm and brief, then looked past me at the 3 houses. Those the structures? He asked. I nodded. He grunted and set the tripod down. Let me pull the original plat and get my equipment set up. This shouldn't take more than a few hours. I stayed out of his way while he worked. He moved methodically, setting up a total station on the tripod, checking angles, marking points with wooden stakes and orange flags. At one point, he crouched down near the fence line and brushed away a thin layer of dirt. Beneath it was a small iron pin, the kind surveyors use to mark property corners. This is your southeast corner, he said. tapping the pin with the back of his hand. "Original marker from 2012. Still right where it should be." He stood up and looked at the houses again, then back at his notes. "If your deed is accurate, and I'm reading this plat correctly, all 3 of those houses are sitting on your parcel, not even close to the line. They're dead center." I felt something settle in my chest, a kind of cold certainty. "Can you document that?" He nodded. "I'll have a full report ready by Wednesday. Boundary map, coordinates, photographs, the whole package. You planning to use this in court?" I said yes. He didn't ask any more questions. Just packed up his equipment, told me he'd email the report, and drove off. I stood there for a few more minutes, looking at the iron pin half buried in the dirt. That pin had been there for 12 years. It didn't lie. It didn't move. And it proved that everything built on top of it was trespassing. Wednesday afternoon, Roy sent the survey report. I opened it immediately. The boundary map was clear, with color-coded lines showing my property in blue and the houses in red. The red overlapped the blue by more than 3 acres. At the bottom of the report, Roy had added a note. Based on the recorded deed and physical monuments, the structures identified as Lot 7, 8, and 9 are entirely within the bounds of Parcel Section 14, Block 3, owner Callum Reed. I forwarded the email to Elena immediately. Thursday morning, I met with her again. She had the survey report printed and spread out on the conference table alongside everything else. She looked at me and said, "This is it. We have everything we need. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'll file a quiet title action in district court. That's a civil lawsuit asking the court to declare that you are the rightful owner and that the correction deed is void. Second, I'll send a cease and desist letter to Karen Whitmore and the LLC, putting them on notice that we're aware of the fraud and that any further action on the property will be considered bad faith. Third, I'll contact the Harris County District Attorney's Office and provide them with copies of everything. If they decide to open a criminal investigation, that's their call, but we'll make sure they have what they need." She looked at me. "This is going to take time, months, maybe longer, and Karen is going to fight back. She'll hire her own lawyer. She'll try to claim the transfer was legitimate, and she'll use the HOA to pressure you. Are you ready for that?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." She nodded. "Good. One more thing. Do you know who actually lives in those houses? The people who bought them?" I shook my head. She made a note. "We'll need to find out. If they're innocent buyers, they might be victims too. That could work in our favor." She closed the legal pad and stood up. "I'll have the quiet title complaint drafted by tomorrow and the cease and desist letter out early next week. In the meantime, stay away from the property. Don't confront Karen. Don't talk to the homeowners. Don't do anything that could be used against you later. Let the process work." I thanked her and left. The evidence was stacking up. Forged deed, fake notary, invalid permits, survey confirmation, all of it pointing in one direction. Karen Whitmore had stolen my land, and now the walls were starting to close in. The cease and desist letter went out the following Tuesday. Elena sent me a copy by email. It was 3 pages long, formal and precise, laying out every piece of evidence. We had the forged deed, the fake notary stamp, the survey report showing encroachment, and the invalid permits. It is named Karen Whitmore, Magnolia Development Holdings, LLC, and the 2 other managers listed on the filing, David Eng and Patricia Ruiz. The letter demanded that all claims to the property cease immediately and warned that failure to comply would result in legal action. Elena also sent copies to the homeowners at all 3 addresses, informing them that there was a title dispute and advising them to consult their own attorneys. I didn't expect Karen to respond quietly, and she didn't. 2 days later, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Regarding Magnolia Springs property dispute." I opened it. The sender was Marcus, and the message was short. "Mr. Reed, my name is Marcus. I own one of the houses on Magnolia Springs Drive. I received a letter from your attorney about a title issue. I'd like to speak with you. This is my number." He left a cell phone number at the bottom. I stared at the screen for a minute, then called Elena. She picked up on the second ring. I told her about the email. "Do I talk to him?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Normally I'd say no, But if he's reaching out voluntarily, it might be useful. He could be an ally. Just be careful. Don't admit anything. Don't make promises. And don't discuss settlement terms. Listen more than you talk. I said I understood, and hung up. Then I called Marcus. He answered immediately, voice tense. "Mr. Reed," I confirmed. "Thank you for calling. I don't know if you have time, but I'd like to meet in person. There's a diner off Highway 59, near Humble. Can you meet me there tonight?" "Around 7 p.m. I agreed and wrote down the address. The diner was a small, weathered place with a gravel parking lot and neon signs in the windows. I got there a few minutes early and took a booth near the back. Marcus arrived right on time. He was in his mid-40s, clean cut, wearing a polo shirt and khakis, and he looked exhausted. He slid into the booth across from me, ordered coffee from the waitress without looking at the menu, and then folded his hands on the table. "I don't know where to start," he said. "My wife and I bought that house 8 months ago. We paid $695,000. We went through a title company, got title insurance, did everything the right way, or at least we thought we did. Now, your lawyer is saying the whole thing is fraudulent." His hands tightened. "My wife is 7 months pregnant. We just finished the nursery. And now I'm finding out we might not even own the house." I didn't say anything right away. I just let him talk. He reached into a messenger bag and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it across the table. "This is everything from the closing. The deed, the title insurance policy, the disclosure forms, all of it. I thought maybe you'd want to see it. Maybe it helps your case. I don't know. I just know that Karen Whitmore sold us this house, told us the land had been legally subdivided, and now it turns out none of that is true." I opened the folder and started flipping through the pages. The closing statement showed Marcus and his wife, Amy, as buyers. The seller was listed as Magnolia Development Holdings LLC, represented by Karen Whitmore. The title insurance policy was issued by a company I'd never heard of, Lone Star Guarantee Title. I took a photo of the policy with my phone. "Did you ever meet Karen before the sale?" I asked. Marcus nodded. "Twice. Once when we toured the house, and once at the closing. She was professional, confident. She had all the paperwork ready, answered every question. There was no reason to think anything was wrong." I kept reading. Buried in the disclosures was a line that caught my attention. "Seller certifies that all permits and inspections have been completed in accordance with county regulations." But I'd already seen the missing signature on the environmental assessment. Karen had certified something that wasn't true. I closed the folder and slid it back to Marcus. "I'm not suing you," I said. "You're a victim here, same as me. But I need to get my land back, and that means proving the deed to the LLC was fraudulent. If that happens, the title chain breaks. And technically, the LLC never had the right to sell you the house." Marcus's face went pale. "So what does that mean for us? Do we lose the house? Do we get our money back?" I shook my head. "I don't know yet. My lawyer is working on it, but I'm not trying to throw you out on the street. If this gets resolved, we'll figure something out." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Okay. If there's anything else I can do to help, let me know. I want this fixed as much as you do." He stood up, left a $10 bill on the table for the coffee, and walked out. I sat there for a few more minutes, going through the folder again. Then I called Elena and told her everything. She asked me to send her the photos of the title insurance policy. If Lone Star Guarantee issued a policy based on a fraudulent deed, they're liable too, she said. "I'll add them to the complaint." I sent the photos and hung up. The next day, Elena called me back. "I did some digging on Lone Star Guarantee Title. It's a shell company, registered in Delaware. No physical office, no employees listed. It was created 3 months before the first house sold, and Karen Whitmore is listed as the incorporator." My stomach dropped. "So she created a fake title company to issue fake insurance policies." Elena's voice was cold. "Exactly. This isn't just deed fraud anymore. This is wire fraud, mail fraud, and possibly racketeering. I'm sending everything to the DA's office today, and I'm recommending they open a full criminal investigation." I thanked her and sat down on the edge of the motel bed. The scope of what Karen had done was becoming clearer. It wasn't just one forged document. It was a system, a network of fake entities, fake paperwork, fake assurances, all designed to make the fraud look legitimate. And she'd pulled it off for almost a year. That evening, I got another email. This one was from Patricia Ruiz, one of the managers listed on the LLC filing. The subject line read, "Immediate response required." I opened it. The email was terse and professional. "Mr. Reed, I am writing in response to the cease and desist letter sent by your attorney. I want to be clear that I did not know about any fraudulent activity related to Magnolia Development Holdings, LLC. My name was added to the filing without my consent, and I have never participated in any decisions or transactions involving the company. I have retained my own counsel and will be cooperating fully with any investigation. I recommend you direct all further communication through my attorney." She included her lawyer's contact information at the bottom. I forwarded the email to Elena. She called me 10 minutes later. "This is huge," she said. "If Patricia is telling the truth, it means Karen used her name without permission. That's identity theft on top of everything else. And if Patricia cooperates, she might have documents or communications that prove Karen was acting alone." I could hear her typing in the background. "I'm going to reach out to Patricia's attorney and see if we can coordinate. The more people who turn on Karen, the faster this unravels." I hung up and opened my laptop. I added a new column to my spreadsheet: witnesses and co-conspirators. Under witnesses, I put Marcus and Patricia Ruiz. Under co-conspirators, I put Karen Whitmore and a question mark next to David Eng. I still didn't know where he fit, but I had a feeling I'd find out soon. 2 days later, I was back at the property. I didn't go through the gate, just parked on the county road and walked along the fence line like I'd done before. It was late afternoon, the sun low and orange, casting long shadows across the pavement. I saw Marcus again, this time in his front yard, standing near a small tree his wife had probably planted. He saw me and waved. I waved back. Then I kept walking, past the second house, past the third, all the way to the cottonwood trees. The fence ended there, and the ground was still untouched, dirt and dry grass and stones the color of rust. I crouched down and picked up another piece of caliche, smooth and warm from the sun. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the weight of it. This was still my land. The survey said so. The deed said so. And every new piece of evidence we uncovered made it harder for Karen to pretend otherwise. I stood up and looked back at the houses. Lights were starting to come on in the windows. Families inside, lives being lived, completely unaware that the ground beneath them was about to shift. I didn't want to hurt them, but I wasn't going to let Karen get away with this either. There had to be a way to make it right for everyone, and Elena was going to find it. I walked back to my truck and checked my phone. There was a message from Elena. DA's office confirmed they're opening an investigation. They want to interview you next week. I'll send you the details. I read the message twice, then put the phone away. The walls were closing in. Karen had built this fraud carefully, layer by layer, but now those layers were being peeled back one by one. And soon, there would be nowhere left for her to hide. The interview with the DA's office was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. Elena met me in the lobby of the Harris County Criminal Courthouse, a tall gray building downtown with metal detectors and security guards at every entrance. She was carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a dark suit. All business. "Just answer their questions honestly," she said, as we rode the elevator up to the 4th floor. "Don't volunteer information they don't ask for, and if you're not sure about something, say so. They're on our side. But they need to build their own case." I nodded. The elevator doors opened, and we walked down a long hallway to a conference room with frosted glass walls. Inside, 2 people were waiting. The first was a man in his early 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He introduced himself as Assistant District Attorney Michael Ortiz, Economic Crimes Division. The second was a woman in her 30s with short dark hair, Detective Laura Campos, Financial Crimes Unit. They both shook my hand, and we sat down at a long table. Ortiz opened a laptop and pulled up a file. "Mr. Reed, we've reviewed the materials your attorney provided, and we believe there's sufficient evidence to proceed with a criminal investigation into Karen Whitmore and Magnolia Development Holdings, LLC. What we need from you today is a detailed timeline of events and any additional information that might help us understand the scope of the fraud. I walked them through everything. The year on the oil rig, the lack of communication, the return, the discovery of the houses, the forged deed, the fake notary, the survey, the permits, the shell title company. Ortiz took notes. Campos asked clarifying questions. When I finished, Ortiz leaned back in his chair. "How long were you unreachable?" he asked. I told him 366 days, no cell service, limited internet access only during port calls. He nodded. "That explains the window of opportunity. She knew you wouldn't find out until it was too late." Campos opened a folder and slid a document across the table. It was a printout of an email chain. "We subpoenaed Karen Whitmore's business email account," she said. "This is a conversation between her and David Eng, the contractor listed as a manager on the LLC. It's dated September 2023, 1 month after the correction deed was filed." I read the emails. In one message, Karen wrote, "Foundation inspection scheduled for next week. Make sure everything looks clean. Reed won't be back for months. And by the time he is, we'll have 3 buyers locked in." David replied, "Understood. I'll handle the inspections. What about the notary issue?" Karen's response, "Already taken care of. No one checks expired commissions." I felt my jaw tighten. Campos tapped the page. "This shows intent and premeditation. She knew what she was doing was illegal, and she actively concealed it." Ortiz closed his laptop. "We're going to arrest her, probably within the next 2 weeks. Charges will include forgery, fraudulent use of identifying information, theft by deception, and possibly wire fraud. We're still building the case, but what you've provided gives us a strong foundation." Elena asked, "What about Patricia Ruiz and David Eng?" Ortiz glanced at Campos, then back at us. "Patricia Ruiz's attorney reached out to us. She's cooperating fully and claims she had no knowledge her name was used. We believe her. As for David Eng, we're still investigating. The emails suggest he knew about the notary fraud, but we need more before we charge him." He stood up. "Thank you for coming in. Mr. Reed, we'll keep you updated as the case progresses. In the meantime, if Karen or anyone associated with her contacts you, let us know immediately." We shook hands again, and Elena and I left. Outside the courthouse, the heat hit like a wall. Elena turned to me. "This is good. The DA has what they need. Now we wait for them to move." I nodded, but I didn't feel relieved. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a storm, waiting for the wind to shift. That evening, I drove past the property again. I didn't stop, just slowed down as I passed the gate. Karen's car was parked near the clubhouse, a silver Lexus with a vanity plate that read, "KW Realty." I kept driving. 2 days later, I was at the motel when my phone buzzed. It was an email notification. The sender was HOA Magnolia Springs, and the subject line read, "Emergency Community Meeting, Thursday, 7 p.m. All residents required to attend." I opened it. The message was brief. "Due to recent legal matters affecting the community, an emergency meeting has been called. Topics include trespassing incidents, property boundaries, and community safety. Attendance is mandatory for all homeowners." At the bottom, it was signed by Karen Whitmore, HOA president. I stared at the screen. This was her move. She was going to use the HOA to frame me as the problem, to rally the homeowners against me before the truth came out. I forwarded the email to Elena. She called me 5 minutes later. "Are you going?" she asked. I thought about it. "Should I?" She was quiet for a moment. "Normally, I'd say no, but if she's going to make this public, it might be better for you to be there. Just don't engage. Don't argue. Let her talk, and let her dig her own hole." I agreed. Thursday evening, I drove to the clubhouse. It was a low brick building near the entrance to the development, with a small parking lot and a sign out front that said Magnolia Springs Community Center. There were already a dozen cars there when I arrived. I parked at the far end and walked in. The main room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a table at the front. About 30 people were seated, mostly couples, some with kids. I recognized Marcus sitting near the middle with his wife. He saw me and gave a small nod. I took a seat in the back row, near the door. At exactly 7 p.m., Karen walked in. She was wearing a navy blazer and carrying a clipboard, and she moved to the front of the room like she owned it. She set the clipboard down on the table, looked out at the crowd, and smiled. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I know this is inconvenient, but we have a serious matter to address." She clicked a button on a laptop, and a projector screen behind her lit up. The first slide showed a photo of me standing near the fence line, taken from a distance. "This man," Karen said, pointing at the screen, "has been trespassing on community property multiple times over the past 2 weeks. His name is Callum Reed, and he has been making false claims about ownership of the land this community is built on." She clicked to the next slide. It showed a map of the subdivision with the 3 houses highlighted. "These properties were legally purchased, legally developed, and legally sold to the families living in them today. Mr. Reed is attempting to disrupt that through baseless accusations and harassment." I stayed silent. I could feel people turning to look at me, but I kept my eyes on Karen. She clicked again. The next slide was a timeline, but it was wrong. It showed the correction deed being filed in August 2023, but it labeled it as a voluntary transfer with my signature. No mention of forgery. No mention of the fake notary. She was lying in front of 30 people, and she was doing it smoothly. Marcus stood up. "Karen, I received a letter from Mr. Chicham, Reed's attorney. It says the deed you're talking about is fraudulent. It says you forged his signature." The room went silent. Karen's smile tightened. "That letter is part of a harassment campaign. Reed abandoned this property for over a year, and when he came back, he decided he didn't like what had been done with it. So now he's trying to intimidate innocent families." Marcus didn't sit down. "But the letter included a notary affidavit. It said the stamp on the deed was fake." Karen's face flushed slightly. "I don't know what letter you're referring to, but I can assure you that all documents related to this development were processed legally." Another man stood up near the front. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and glasses. "I'm David Park. I'm an attorney. Not involved in this case, just a homeowner. But I have a question. Karen, if the deed was legitimate, why didn't Mr. Gio Reed sign it in person? Why was it notarized by someone whose commission had expired?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at her clipboard, then back at the crowd. "I'm not going to discuss legal details in a public forum. If anyone has concerns, they can reach out to the HOA board privately." David Park didn't sit down. "With all due respect, you called this meeting, you made it public, and now you're refusing to answer basic questions about the legitimacy of the property we all bought." The room started to murmur. I stayed in my seat, saying nothing. Then the door behind me opened. I turned. Deputy Tom Bracken stepped inside, in full uniform, badge visible on his chest. He looked around the room, then walked to the front. "Evening, folks. I'm Deputy Bracken with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. I was asked to stop by and make sure everyone here is aware that there is an active investigation into potential fraud related to this development. The District Attorney's Office is handling it, and I'd recommend that anyone with concerns contact them directly." He looked at Karen. "Ms. Whitmore, you've been notified of the investigation. I'd suggest you consult with your attorney before making any further public statements." Karen's face went pale. She picked up her clipboard, her hands shaking slightly, and said, "This meeting is adjourned." People started standing up, talking in low voices, some heading for the door. Marcus walked over to me. "Thank you for not making this worse," he said quietly. I nodded. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to get the truth out." He left with his wife, and I followed them out into the parking lot. The air was cooler now, a breeze coming in from the east. I got in my truck and sat there for a minute, watching people leave. Karen stayed inside, alone at the front table, staring at her laptop. The power had shifted, and she knew it. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after the HOA meeting. I wasn't there when it happened, but Elena called me as soon as she heard. Harris County Sheriff's Office picked her up at her real estate office around 9 a.m. Charges include forgery, fraudulent use of identifying information, and theft by deception. Bail hearing is this afternoon. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath. "This is it, Callum. The criminal case is moving." I thanked her and hung up. I sat in the motel room for a long time, staring at the wall, trying to process it. For over a month, I'd been building toward this moment, piece by piece, document by document. Now it was real. Karen Whitmore was in custody. That afternoon, I drove to the courthouse for the bail hearing. I sat in the back of the courtroom, which was small and dimly lit, with wooden benches and a raised platform for the judge. Karen was brought in wearing street clothes, a gray blouse and black slacks, her hands cuffed in front of her. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face drawn and pale. Her attorney, a man in his 50s with slicked back hair and an expensive suit, stood next to her. The judge, a woman in her early 60s named Barbara Winters, reviewed the charges. Ms. Whitmore, you are charged with forgery under Texas Penal Code Section 32.21, fraudulent use of identifying information under Section 32.51, and theft by deception under Section 31.0. Betrayal. How do you plead? Karen's attorney answered for her. Not guilty, Your Honor. Judge Winters set bail at $50,000, with conditions that Karen surrender her passport, not leave Harris County, and have no contact with any witnesses or co-conspirators. The hearing lasted less than 10 minutes. Karen posted bail that same day and was released. Over the next 2 weeks, the case began to unravel publicly. The local news picked up the story. A reporter from a Houston TV station reached out to me for an interview. I declined, but Elena stayed on my behalf, outlining the fraud and confirming that the DA's office was prosecuting. The story ran on the evening news with the headline, HOA president arrested for allegedly forging deed, building homes on stolen land. The backlash was immediate. Homeowners in Magnolia Springs started calling for Karen's resignation. An emergency HOA board meeting was held, and Karen was removed as president by a unanimous vote. Marcus sent me a text. The board voted to cooperate fully with your attorney. We want this resolved. I forwarded the message to Elena. Meanwhile, the quiet title action moved forward. Elena filed the complaint in district court, and Karen's attorney filed a response denying all allegations. But the response was weak, filled with procedural objections and vague claims about good faith reliance on county records. Elena tore it apart in her reply brief, attaching the surveyor's report, the notary affidavit, the forged deed comparison, and the emails between Karen and David Eng. The judge scheduled a hearing for early December. Around the same time, the building permits came under scrutiny. The county's permit office launched an internal review after Elena flagged the missing environmental assessment signature. They discovered that 2 other permits issued around the same time, both for properties managed by Karen, also had irregularities. The permits were formally revoked, and the county issued a cease and desist order on any further construction tied to Magnolia Development Holdings. One afternoon in late November, I received an email from David Eng. The subject line read, "Settlement Proposal." I opened it cautiously. The message was short. "Mr. Reed, my attorney has advised me to reach out regarding a potential resolution. I acknowledge that I was aware of certain irregularities in the development process and that I should have raised concerns earlier. I am willing to provide testimony in exchange for immunity from prosecution. I would also like to discuss a financial settlement to compensate you for your losses. Please have your attorney contact mine." I forwarded the email to Elena. She called me within the hour. "This is big. If David testifies, it corroborates everything we already have and fills in the gaps. I'll reach out to his attorney and coordinate with the DA's office." 2 days later, David Eng signed a cooperation agreement. In exchange for immunity, he provided detailed testimony about Karen's scheme, including emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls where Karen explicitly discussed forging the deed and using an expired notary stamp. With David's testimony in hand, the DA's office added wire fraud charges to Karen's indictment. Wire fraud carried federal implications, and the case was referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Texas. Elena explained that this elevated the severity significantly. Wire fraud is a federal felony. If convicted, she's looking at years in federal prison, not just probation. The quiet title hearing took place on December 10th. I sat in the courtroom with Elena while Karen's attorney made a last-ditch effort to argue that the correction deed was valid based on mutual mistake and that Karen had acted in good faith. Judge Winters listened without expression. Then she asked Karen's attorney a simple question. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Reed signed the correction deed in person or authorized anyone to sign on his behalf? The attorney hesitated. No, Your Honor, but we believe there may have been an informal agreement. Judge Winters cut him off. There's no evidence of an informal agreement. There's evidence of forgery, a fake notary stamp, and a fraudulent LLC. The correction deed is void. She banged her gavel. I am granting the plaintiff's motion for quiet title. The deed recorded on August 15th, 2023, transferring ownership from Callum Reed to Magnolia Development Holdings LLC, is declared null and void. Title to the property legally remains with Callum Reed. The courtroom was silent. I felt Elena's hand briefly touch my shoulder. Karen sat motionless at the defense table, staring straight ahead. Her attorney closed his briefcase and stood up without another word. We left the courtroom and walked out into the December air. It was cooler now, the Texas heat finally breaking. Elena turned to me. You won. The land is yours. Now we need to figure out what happens to the houses. I nodded. That was the next battle. Later that week, Elena and I met with Marcus and the other 2 homeowners, Jonathan and Lisa Tran, and David and Michelle Park. We sat in a conference room at Elena's office, and she laid out the situation plainly. The court has confirmed that Callum is the legal owner of the land. That means the deeds you received from the LLC are invalid. However, you are innocent purchasers who acted in good faith. Callum is not seeking to evict you or demolish your homes. Instead, he is proposing a lease arrangement. She slid a document across the table. This is a lease agreement. Each of you would pay Callum $2,400 per month, which is fair market rent for land of this size and location. The lease term is 5 years, and at the end of that term, you will have the option to purchase the land beneath your home at a fixed price determined by an independent appraisal. Marcus looked at the document, then at me. Why are you doing this? He asked. I met his eyes. Because you didn't do anything wrong. You bought a house from someone you trusted, and she lied to you. I'm not going to punish you for that, but I also can't just give away my land. This way, you keep your home, I get compensated, and in 5 years, if you want to buy the land, we'll make it happen. Lisa Tran, a woman in her 30s with short black hair, spoke up. What if we can't afford the monthly rent? Elena answered. The lease includes a hardship clause. If you experience financial difficulties, Callum has agreed to work with you on a payment plan. The goal is stability, not displacement. David Park nodded slowly. This is more than fair. I'll sign. One by one, the others agreed. We spent the next hour going over the details, and by the end of the meeting, all 3 families had signed the lease agreements. A week later, Karen Whitmore's criminal trial date was set for March, but before it could go to trial, her attorney negotiated a plea deal. Karen pled guilty to forgery, fraudulent use of identifying information, and wire fraud. In exchange for the plea, the DA's office dropped the theft by deception charge. She was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay restitution of $140,000 to me for legal fees, surveyor costs, and other damages. Additionally, the Texas Real Estate Commission held a hearing and permanently revoked her real estate license. Magnolia Development Holdings LLC was formally dissolved, and all assets were liquidated to cover outstanding debts. I received the restitution payment in 2 installments over the next 6 months. It didn't cover everything, but it was enough. More importantly, it was accountability. Karen had tried to erase me, to take something that wasn't hers, and now she was paying the price. The HOA elected a new board, and the community began to rebuild its reputation. Marcus and the other homeowners became allies, helping to clear out the remnants of Karen's fraud and restore trust. On a quiet afternoon in late March, I drove out to the property one last time before starting construction on my cabin. The 3 houses stood solid and occupied, lights in the windows, lives being lived. The cottonwood trees still stood along the eastern edge, their branches swaying in the wind. I walked to the spot where I planned to build and crouched down, picking up a piece of caliche. The land was mine again. Legally, officially, undeniably. And this time, no one could take it away. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold morning in early March. I sat in the federal courtroom with Elena, watching as Karen Whitmore was led in by a U.S. Marshal. She wore a plain gray suit, no jewelry, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked older than she had 6 months ago, the confidence stripped away, replaced by something hollow. Her attorney stood beside her at the defense table, shuffling papers but saying nothing. The judge, a man in his late 60s named Honorable Richard Brennan, reviewed the case file in silence for what felt like a long time. Then he looked up. "Ms. Whitmore, you have pled guilty to forgery, fraudulent use of identifying information, and wire fraud. These are serious crimes that undermine the integrity of property ownership and the trust that communities place in licensed professionals." His voice was calm but firm. "You exploited Mr. Reed's absence, forged legal documents, created shell companies, and defrauded innocent homeowners who believed they were purchasing legitimate property. Your actions caused significant financial and emotional harm." He paused. "Do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Karen stood slowly. Her voice was quiet, almost inaudible. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I made terrible decisions, and I take full responsibility." Judge Brennan nodded once. "The court sentences you to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay restitution of $140,000 to Mr. Callum Reed. Additionally, you are permanently barred from holding a real estate license in the state of Texas." He brought the gavel down. "Court is adjourned." Karen was led out by the marshal. She didn't look at me. I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of it settle. It was over. Not just the case, but the entire chapter. Elena touched my arm. "You did it," she said quietly. I nodded, but didn't say anything. We walked out of the courthouse together, into the cool March air. The sky was overcast, and a drizzle was starting to fall. Elena stopped on the steps and turned to me. "What are you going to do now?" I thought about the cabin I'd been planning, the cleared spot among the cottonwood trees, the life I'd been holding on to for so long. "I'm going to build," I said. She smiled. "Good." Over the next 2 months, the restitution payments came through. Karen's assets were liquidated, her real estate office closed, and the money transferred to an account Elena had set up. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to cover my legal fees and start construction on the cabin. I hired a small crew, local contractors recommended by Roy Jenkins, and we broke ground in early April. The design was simple 700 square feet, 1 bedroom, an open kitchen and living area, and a covered porch facing the cottonwood trees, solar panels on the roof, a rainwater collection system, and a small wood stove for heat. I wanted it to be self-sufficient, a place that didn't rely on anyone or anything except the land itself. While the cabin was being built, I continued living in the motel, but I spent most of my days on the property, working alongside the crew. Marcus stopped by one afternoon, bringing sandwiches and cold drinks. We sat on a stack of lumber and ate in silence for a while. Then he said, "My son was born last week. We named him Daniel." I looked at him. "Congratulations." He nodded, smiling for the first time in months. "Thank you for giving us a chance to stay. A lot of people wouldn't have done that." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. We finished eating, and he went back to his house. I stayed and watched the sun set over the frame of the cabin, the sky turning orange and pink, the cottonwood trees swaying gently in the breeze. By late May, the cabin was finished. I moved in on a Saturday morning, carrying a single duffel bag and a cardboard box with a few essentials, the laminated deed, the court order, and a framed photo from the oil rig. I set the photo on a small table near the window, next to the deed. The cabin smelled like fresh wood and paint. The floors were pine, the walls unfinished cedar. It was quiet, the kind of quiet I'd been chasing for over a year. That evening, Elena stopped by with a housewarming gift, a handmade wooden sign with the words, "Reed's Cottonwood, Private Property, Esta 2012, carved into it. I hung it on the gatepost at the entrance to the property, and we stood back to look at it. The letters caught the last light of the day, golden and clear. "It suits you," she said. I agreed. 3 months later, I was sitting on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun drop below the horizon. The air was warm but not oppressive, the kind of evening where the wind moved through the cottonwood trees and made that low hum I'd been hearing in my head for over a year. The sound was real now, not a memory. I had a glass of iced tea in my hand, and a dog I'd adopted from the shelter the week before was lying at my feet, a mutt named Copper with rust-colored fur and one crooked ear. He was good company, didn't ask questions, didn't need explanations, just existed in the space with me, calm and steady. The 3 houses were still there, of course, lights on in the windows, cars in the driveways. Marcus and Amy had their newborn, and I'd see them sometimes walking the neighborhood with a stroller. The Trans were planting a garden in their backyard, tomatoes and peppers in neat rows. The Parks had repainted their front door a deep blue. Life was happening around me, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like an intrusion. It felt like balance. They paid rent on time every month, $2,400 deposited into my account like clockwork. We had an agreement, a structure, and it worked. In 5 years, if they wanted to buy the land beneath their homes, we'd sit down and make it happen. Until then, this was enough. I'd received an email a few weeks ago from a nonprofit organization called the Texas Land Rights Coalition. They'd read about my case in the news and wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak at a workshop they were organizing in Houston. The topic was protecting property rights against fraud, and they thought my story could help other landowners recognize the warning signs. I'd stared at the email for a long time before replying. Public speaking wasn't something I enjoyed, and reliving the whole ordeal in front of strangers felt exhausting. But then I thought about Marcus, about the fear in his eyes when he realized his home might not be his. I thought about Patricia Ruiz, whose name had been stolen and used without her knowledge. I thought about how many other people might be vulnerable to the same kind of scheme, and I wrote back, "I'll do it." The workshop was scheduled for September, still a few months away. I hadn't committed to anything beyond showing up and telling the truth. Maybe it would help someone. Maybe it wouldn't. Either way, it felt like the right thing to do. That evening, as the light faded and the stars started to appear, I heard footsteps on the gravel path leading to the cabin. I looked up and saw Marcus walking toward me, hands in his pockets. "Hey," he called out. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" I gestured to the empty chair next to me. He sat down, exhaled slowly, and looked out at the trees. "Amy and I were talking," he said. "We want to take you up on that option, to buy the land. Not now, but when the 5 years are up, we want to make this permanent." I nodded. "That's what the agreement is for." He smiled. "I know. I just wanted to say it out loud. This place, it's home now, for all of us." He stood up, shook my hand, and walked back toward his house. I sat there for a while longer, listening to the wind. The land was mine again, not just on paper, but in practice. I could walk every inch of it without a fence or a sign telling me I didn't belong. I could build, plant, or just sit and do nothing. The choice was mine, and that was all I'd ever wanted. The oil rig felt like a lifetime ago, but the lessons it taught me hadn't faded. Patience, precision, the certainty that pressure, applied steadily over time, cracks everything that isn't solid. Karen had built her fraud on lies and forgery, and it had crumbled under the weight of the truth. I'd built my case on documents, procedures, and the law, and it had held. The dog shifted at my feet, and I reached down to scratch behind his ears. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of a lawnmower, someone tending their yard before dark. Normal life, steady life, the kind of life I'd been trying to get back to. I picked up my phone and opened the Photos app, scrolling back to the picture I'd taken that first day, standing in front of the white HOA sign with the 3 mansions looming behind me. I looked at it for a moment, then deleted it. I didn't need it anymore. The only proof I needed was the deed in the frame on my table, the sign at the gate, and the quiet hum of the cottonwood trees. This was Reed's cottonwood. Always had been. Always would be. If you believe justice should always find a way, subscribe to Karma Fence for more stories where patience, evidence, and the truth win. Drop a comment. I read every one.